Hey guys, how's it going? I wanted to make a video tonight because I have seen a lot of people out there with a lot of anxiety, especially here in the United States, for some obvious reasons. And so, in my opinion, the best way to help people with some of the fears that they might be having is through education. A little background on me. I have been invested in American politics basically since I was a kid. American history was my favorite subject in school, and I was debate president at my high school. So I've kind of been in this world for a long time. And tonight I wanted to explain what happened in an objective way. I am not going to express any of my personal opinions. I am not going to tell you who I voted for. And I am not going to discuss the merits of some of the more controversial political issues. All I want to do is give you all kind of a history lesson. I want to explain why the election turned out the way that it did. And I want to explain the American system of governance from the founding of our country as a collection of British colonies to today. And hopefully by doing that, I can put some of your fears to rest. I'm not going to be citing any sources, because most of the stuff you can just look up on Google if you feel the need to verify any of it. So, there is kind of an internal debate within the United States as to whether or not we are a true democracy. We were set up as a representative republic. So we have a small r Republican style government. What I mean by small r is that I'm not referring to the Republican Party in the United States. I'm just referring to what that system of government is called. And we definitely have democratic features. We have universal suffrage, which means that any citizen over the age of 18 can vote in the United States, which is pretty common in other democracies and other like kind of democratic systems in like Europe or Asia, Africa. There's a bunch of places that have democratic systems. But we also have checks on that system, meaning that we kind of have like this balance of direct democracy and proportional representation. An example of that would be Congress. So, the United States Congress is composed of two different chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives, all of the delegates, all of the Congress people in the House, each state gets an amount of seats that's proportional to their population. So like California, for example, is the most populous state in the United States, and so it gets the most representation in the House of Representatives. And then the Senate is a more like equal representation. So each state gets 2 senators. So there's 50 states, and that means there are 100 senators, and each state gets 2 of them. So the Constitution was set up in a way that kind of balanced representation by population, and then more equal representation. Our Constitution, from the research that I've done over the years, was inspired by a lot of different systems of government throughout history, like the Roman Republic. But our system of government was primarily influenced by the system that the Iroquois Confederacy had. The Iroquois Confederacy, in their language, they're called the Haudenosaunee. They are a native people that were native to upstate New York and other places in New England. And so they had this system of checks and balances and of various branches of government. And so, we took that and that's part of what inspired our 3 branches of government. We have Congress, which is our legislature, which, as I explained earlier, is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and both houses have to approve legislation before it passes, depending on what that legislation is. It requires different levels of approval. Some just require a simple majority, others would require 2/3 of the Senate and the House. And I believe some things require more than a 2/3 vote by each chamber. And then we have the executive branch, which is led by the president. The executive branch has the power to set foreign policy. It has power over certain executive departments, like the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Defense. And the president is considered the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. So that means that they are the kind of ultimate authority when it comes to the military. And Congress has the authority to vote to impeach and remove the president if they do something that is outside of their constitutional authority. If they have violated the law in some way. And we saw that during Trump's last term. But the House voted to impeach him twice. But the Senate didn't vote to remove him from office, so he remained president. Those are two separate votes. So the House can vote to impeach, which basically means that they're charging or indicting him with something. And then the Senate would have to vote to remove him from office, in which case the vice president would assume the presidency. And then the third branch of government is the judiciary, which the highest authority for the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has the ability to interpret the Constitution and decide what laws are constitutional and what things violate the Constitution. Some famous cases from them would be Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional to segregate schools by race. Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage in the United States. And Roe v. Wade, which was recently overturned in 2022. And that guaranteed the constitutional right to an abortion. However, because that has been overturned, it kind of got kicked back to the state governments to decide if they wanted to allow abortions to remain legal in their states, and if so, like up to how many weeks of pregnancy. And then on top of those kind of separate branches of government, we are also a federal republic. So that means that states have a pretty high degree of autonomy to decide what is legal in their states. So, for example, I live in the state of Utah, and here we have medical marijuana, but marijuana is still considered a Schedule I substance by the federal authorities and is still illegal to possess and use for any reason under federal law. But because my state allows it for medical purposes, I'm not going to get in trouble with the state authorities, and the federal authorities just kind of leave it alone. So that's kind of the context for how our system of government works. For all of its flaws, we are the only country that has lasted almost 250 years with that kind of system. And while it can be flawed sometimes, and while in the past certain groups of people weren't allowed to participate in it fully, it by its nature kind of leaves itself open to constantly expanding and improving. You see things like that with stuff like the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed women the right to vote. The 13th and 14th Amendment, which abolished slavery and established equal protection for every citizen under the law. In the Constitution, we have several rights that are basically solidly guaranteed. It would take 2/3 of the states and 2/3 of Congress to approve a new amendment. And then I think it would require 3/4 of the states and 3/4 of Congress to ratify it after the amendment was proposed. So anything that is in the Constitution can't be touched without another constitutional amendment, and there is a very, very high threshold to pass one of those. A good example of that happening would be with prohibition. There was a constitutional amendment to ban the sale of alcohol in the early 20th century. And obviously that was overturned, but because it is a constitutional amendment, it required a second constitutional amendment to repeal it. Because once something is in the Constitution, not even the Supreme Court can touch it. So, for example, the legalization of gay marriage by the Supreme Court was argued on the basis of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal legal protections to every citizen. And because marriage is considered a legal contract between two adults, the Supreme Court said, well, the 14th Amendment would also extend to same-sex couples. So, with this recent election, I know a lot of people are scared. I'm not going to place judgment on that one way or the other. But it would be helpful for you to have that context, because no matter how scared you are, we have so many things in place to prevent anything severe from happening. So let's get into analyzing this election, because it was fascinating, at least to me. So, this election was interesting because I don't think it went the way a lot of people were expecting it to. From all of the data that I read, there wasn't really a clear winner, but it was pretty close, and that turned out not to be the case. So I'm going to put my armchair political analyst hat on here, and we're going to go over what happened. So, in the United States, when you are voting for the president is not decided by the popular vote. So, for example, in 2016, Donald Trump won, but he didn't get the votes of the majority of the people that actually voted. And that's another kind of quirk of our system, where we try to balance popular democracy with proportional representation. It's called the Electoral College, and I am going to try to explain it to you in a way that you can understand, but it's one of those Americanisms that people struggle with. So there are 50 states in the United States, and each one of them is assigned a certain number of electoral votes based on their population, just like they're assigned a certain number of representatives in the House and Congress. They are also assigned a certain number of electoral votes based on their population. So, as I mentioned earlier, I live in the state of Utah, and in presidential elections, we are assigned 6 electoral votes because we have a population of about 3 million. States like California, which has the largest population, have 54 electoral votes. And altogether, there are 538 electoral votes between all 50 states. And to win the presidency, you need a majority of the electoral votes, which is 270. So that often results in certain states that don't really have a strong allegiance to either the Democratic or the Republican Party, to basically decide elections, presidential elections. So in this election, those states were North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada, 2 of which border my state. And I actually used to live in Arizona. So, this election was kind of unique because the sitting president, Joe Biden, he decided to drop out of the race. He decided not to seek re-election. And so his vice president, Kamala Harris, kind of stepped in to run. And she had a very limited time to run her campaign. She I believe she took over running for president in July, and the election was this month. So that's not a very long time. Most presidents or most presidential candidates have about a year and a half generally. Another thing is that the Democratic Party decided not to have a primary. A primary is when a bunch of candidates from the same party kind of put themselves out there, and the members of that party get to vote on who they want to be, on who they want to run for president. And they didn't do that this year. I don't know what their reasoning was, but they decided not to. However, on the Republican side, they did have a primary. They had a bunch of different candidates that were trying to become the nominee for president. Of course, that ended up being Donald Trump again. But you had candidates like Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy, who also tried to take that from Donald Trump, but they weren't able to. So Donald Trump became the Republican nominee. So, you know, him and Kamala Harris put themselves out there. They tried to present their policy positions to the people. They tried to sway voters in those swing states that I mentioned. And on election night, Donald Trump secured the Electoral College. He secured most of the swing states. Arizona and Nevada are still counting their ballots at the time that I'm recording this. But it looks like he's going to take them as well. And this time, unlike last time, he not only won the necessary electoral votes, he also won the popular vote. As it stands right now, he won the popular vote by about 5 million. And, you know, if you're not American, it's kind of hard to picture just the sheer size of this country. But we have a population of about 330 million. Which is the third largest population in the world behind India and China. So he won about 70-ish million votes, and she won about 65 million votes in the popular vote. Right now he has 295 electoral votes, which puts him above that 270 vote threshold. But if Arizona and Nevada also go to him, he could have over 300 electoral votes. The Republicans also took control of the Senate. They have the majority of seats in the Senate. And it looks like they might have a majority in the House of Representatives as well. Which means that Trump will be able to more easily enact the policies that he wants to. And it's a pretty clear mandate by the electorate. So a lot of people are surprised by such a decisive outcome, because the majority of us thought it was at least going to be close. A lot of us didn't really know who was going to win. None of us expected a landslide. Basically, I haven't seen an election like this since I've been old enough to vote. And I've been voting since 2016. So what happened is that the sitting president, Joe Biden, is pretty unpopular. A lot of people hold him and his administration responsible for a lot of the economic problems that we have in this country, like inflation. And his vice president couldn't really differentiate herself from him because she's still part of the administration, and that was a lot of the reason why people didn't end up voting for her. Because, when you're trying to feed a family and groceries are getting more expensive, and then you have a candidate who says that she's not going to do anything different than what's been going on the last 4 years, that turns a lot of people off. And so the Republican Party was able to eat into the traditional base of the Democratic Party, which is working class people, with a populist message about how they were going to fix the economy. And they were able to take a sizable chunk of voters away from the Democratic Party. And they were able to make inroads with groups of people who typically vote for the Democratic Party. They almost got a 50% share of the Latino vote. In America, we have so many different groups of people that we sometimes lump them together, which it's neither here nor there, because not everyone from Latin America is the same, but for electoral polling purposes, and for census purposes, we group them under Hispanic or Latino. So he got a pretty large share of that demographic. He also expanded his share of the African American vote, especially African American men. He performed well with suburban voters who tend to be of European descent. And especially young men, like my age and younger, because the Democratic Party has kind of alienated them. I'm not going to get into exactly why. I'm sure you can look that up yourself, but they've had a problem attracting young men to their base. And there was also low turnout from Democratic voters. Some of what I was reading said about 13 million of them stayed home and didn't participate in this election. So the reason I'm talking about all of this isn't because I want to share an opinion about how it turned out. I want to educate you on what happened and what our system of government is like, so that if you're American and you're worried about this election, kind of be put at ease. If you are worried about our system of government changing or collapsing, or becoming authoritarian or something like that, I want you to know that it is very, very difficult for that to happen. We have such a decentralized government, and our government, by its nature, is set up so that there are always checks on the powers in the presidency and even in Congress. Given that the Republican Party will control the presidency and Congress, it will be easier for them to get some of their legislation through, but they won't be able to do anything with any of the rights that the Constitution guarantees us. They won't be able to influence state law without changing the Constitution. So, if you are in that camp that's worried, I hope that helps. If you just wanted to know why the election went the way it did, I hope I explained it as objectively as I could. To kind of summarize that, the Republican Party was able to chip away at voters that typically voted for the Democratic Party, and there was also low turnout on election day from registered Democrats. And if they want to win another election, the Democratic Party has to do some serious reorganization, and they have to really examine the kind of messages that they're giving people, and the way that they're selling their candidates. I hope that this was helpful if you have been worried recently. I know for me personally, being more informed on how things work and being more informed on the rights that we have as citizens, I find that helps me if I ever worry about this stuff. So, I know this was another heavy topic, but I hope this was at least informative, and I hope it's put any fears that you have to rest. Like I said, I am not going to give my personal opinion on anything that happened. It's not really relevant. If you feel the need to, you can discuss it in the comment section, but I am not going to argue for one side or the other. So you can do that amongst yourselves. But yeah, I hope that this explanation and a little bit of a history lesson was able to either provide you with some context or kind of help with any anxiety that you're having. Alright guys, well, I will see you in the next video. Bye.